My name is Kelly, and right now I'm getting yelled at by my mother-in-law over the phone. Why on earth is the house gone? What were you thinking doing something like this? My mother-in-law complained without letting me explain. She doesn't seem to realize that she's the one at fault. I let out a sigh, which must have made her angrier because her voice got even louder. You better explain to me exactly how you turned that house into an empty lot. Well, let me start from the beginning. I decided to give my mother-in-law a full account of what led to this. The story takes us back to when I was a college student. My grandfather, who lived a long life, passed away, and our family had a dispute over his inheritance. It wasn't about money, though. The issue was what to do with Grandpa's old house. It would cost quite a bit to dispose of it, and everyone in the family already owned a house or an apartment. Managing another property, my grandpa's house, seemed too much to ask. That's when the buck passing began. Even though the house was old, it was still livable, and the land it sat on belonged to my grandpa. Inheriting it could be a good asset, especially for someone wanting to live alone. That's when I volunteered to take over the house. With an enthusiastic, "Sure, go ahead" from everyone, the old house and land became mine. So, while I was still a university student, I became the owner of a house and land. There were inheritance taxes, of course, but that was a separate matter. I temporarily borrowed money from my parents and worked part-time jobs to pay them back. By the time I graduated from university, the house and land were truly mine. I started working at a publishing company, and then a friend introduced me to a great guy. We started dating, and that's how I met my husband, Keith. He agreed to live with me in my grandfather's house. The house was old and not very convenient, but Keith never complained, and I appreciated him for that. I enjoyed our newlywed life. However, our blissful married life soon faced an unexpected turn. One day, my mother-in-law visited us and said, "We want to move out of our current apartment. Can we stay here until we find a new place?" Her family included herself, my father-in-law, and my sister-in-law. In other words, 3 people would be moving into her home. I was lost for words. Well, I stuttered. My mother-in-law responded with a sly grin. "The contract in our apartment is up soon, and we'd have to break it if we renewed. You'll help us save money, right?" I protested, "But this is so sudden." She continued, "I'll help with the housework. Sounds good, right?" Just like that, I was forced into living with my husband's family. Luckily, our house was spacious, and we had rooms to spare, so there would be no problem accommodating everyone. As someone who kept working after marriage, having my mother-in-law's help with housework seemed like a good thing. But I couldn't shake off the fear that living together might strain our currently pleasant relationship. Despite some anxiety, our cohabitation began. However, living together quickly proved troublesome. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law were always goofing around and never helped around the house. Even worse, my father-in-law would come home late at night and demand that I prepare meals. At first, I put up with it, but my patience soon wore thin. "Please help me with the housework, mother-in-law. That's what you promised me first," I pleaded. "Did I?" She feigned innocence. Then my sister-in-law chimed in, "How dare you talk back to your husband's parents? You're so insolent for a daughter-in-law." "But this is my house," I argued. "So what if it's your house? You are our daughter-in-law, aren't you?" "Well, yes, but—" "Whatever is our daughter-in-law's is ours, right?" I was too shocked to reply. In the end, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law continued their ways. They partied all the time and never helped around the house. I tried talking to my father-in-law about it, but he said, "You are our daughter-in-law. You should respect us. Nothing good comes from a daughter-in-law defying her in-laws. It'll end in divorce, and you'll be thrown out." My father-in-law seemed to be under some misunderstanding. If I were a stay-at-home wife without a job, I might worry about life after divorce, but I have a job and own assets like a house and land. Being told to divorce doesn't bother me at all. Besides, whether to divorce or not is something my husband and I should decide, not my in-laws. I was annoyed, but there was no point in arguing. I realized they wouldn't listen anyway. I'll have them leave, I muttered to myself. But it wasn't that easy. When I brought up the subject of moving, both my father-in-law and mother-in-law would change the topic. They'd find reasons to keep delaying leaving. Thinking it was strange, I consulted my husband. Do you really think they intend to move out? Now that you mention it, they do seem to be dragging their feet. I don't like the thought of them staying here indefinitely. They might have a reason. We should look into this. Yeah, let's ask our private detective friend. So we decided to get some help. We wanted my mother-in-law and sister-in-law out, even if we had to pay for their move. That was my first wish. About a month later, one day when I was about to scold my mother-in-law for still not doing anything, she came out with this first. Kelly, I want to apologize to you for always causing you trouble. Apologize. Why don't we take a family trip together? That was her proposal. After moving in, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law had done nothing and left everything to me. Now they seemed to regret their behavior and thought they should apologize. It seemed they discussed and concluded that a bonding trip would be the best way to make up for it. Needless to say, I thought if they felt that way, they should leave. But it was hard to complain to someone who was being humble. I decided to take a calm approach. Maybe we both have misunderstandings. It might be nice to go on a trip. Do you agree? My mother-in-law was so happy. Then my sister-in-law added excitedly, we were thinking of an overseas trip. Where would you like to go? Anywhere is fine, I replied. We'll decide then, she said. Suddenly, my sister-in-law interrupted herself and turned to me with an apologetic look. See, we don't have any money right now. Huh? You don't have money. They had no money but proposed a trip. Really, they were exasperating. Saying they had no money could only mean one thing. As I was thinking this, my sister-in-law said, could you lend us some money? Just as I was about to refuse, my mother-in-law said something unexpected. Your dad is retiring soon, so he will get a retirement bonus. We can pay with that. You just have to front the money for now. By dad, she meant my father-in-law. Given his age, his retirement was indeed due. Moreover, the retirement bonus wasn't just a guess. It was a guaranteed sum of money that would surely come. Although I was slightly suspicious, I thought the money would definitely come in. The matter we were discussing on our side needed a bit more time, so it might be better to accept my mother-in-law's invitation and avoid causing tension between us. So I accepted the idea of the trip. After that, I was informed by my mother-in-law and sister-in-law that they had decided on London as our destination. The flight departs at noon from Lax International Airport. Understood, I said. It seems like the trip is going to cost quite a bit. But as we said before, can you front the money for us? They asked. Yes, I'll cover it, I agreed. Even though it was just lending the money, it was not a small sum. But at this point, I couldn't say no. Moreover, it seemed like they had already made the reservation, so I might as well enjoy it. I gave the requested amount to my mother-in-law. On the day of the trip, the meeting time was 5 hours before our flight. My husband Keith, who had been working the previous day, was staying at a hotel near the airport. Therefore, he was not with me on the bus heading to the airport. I decided to try calling Keith. At that moment, a call came from Keith's phone before I could call him. Hello, Keith, are you awake? I said, thinking it was my husband, but it was my mother-in-law's voice. I heard over the phone, Kelly, where are you now? Mother-in-law, I'm on the bus heading to the airport. That's unfortunate. We're about to get on the plane now. What? I was confused. Then my mother-in-law, with a sarcastic voice, dropped this bombshell. Actually, we're leaving at 9. Sorry. You lied to me. It's a family trip, so we're going to enjoy it just as a family. What about my ticket? Canceling right on the day of departure is fine. You were never included. My mother-in-law laughed loudly. Apparently, this was all part of her plan. As I clutched my phone in frustration, my sister-in-law's voice came on. Are you upset? You're upset, aren't you? Do you enjoy this kind of thing? It's fun, by now. At that moment, the line went dead with a strange noise, and the call was cut off. I immediately called back my husband. I could hear the ringing, but it wouldn't connect. Ultimately, I arrived at the airport just before the flight's departure time. When I asked the airport staff, they said the plane had already entered the runway. There was nothing I could do but watch the plane take off. It would take a little over 12 hours for the plane. I waved goodbye to arrive at its destination, and my mother-in-law and her group would be back in about 15 days. I had plenty of time. Play games with me, and I'll show you who's the better player. I went straight home. I immediately contacted a demolition company and asked them to tear down my house. I also contacted a moving company to haul out all the belongings in the house. But it wasn't just my stuff in the house. There were things belonging to my mother-in-law, father-in-law, and sister-in-law. Because this was so sudden, I didn't have a new home ready. After some consideration, I decided to use one of the warehouses that was part of my grandfather's inheritance. This warehouse was something my grandfather had used for his business, and nobody was using it now. However, there was a large parking lot in front of the warehouse, which was currently being used by the people in the neighborhood. I had everything moved to that warehouse. After that, I notified my parents that I was going to rebuild the house. My parents asked why, but I told them I'd explain the details later and hung up the phone. I finally had a chance to take a breather when it was late at night. I had just fallen asleep when I noticed my phone ringing. It was an unknown number, and it was early morning, still dim outside. I hesitated but decided to answer the phone. Hello, is this Kelly? The person on the phone was my husband, Keith. What do you want now? Sorry, has your fever gone down now? What? What are you talking about? I heard you had a high fever, Keith said. As I listened to his story, I realized my mother-in-law's careful maneuvers. Apparently, Keith had been told the correct meeting time. Because the meeting time was early in the morning, he had purposely stayed at a hotel near the airport. When he arrived at the meeting time, he quickly noticed I wasn't there. When he asked my mother-in-law about it, she told him I had gone to the hospital with a high fever. Keith was worried about me, but thought he couldn't call the hospital. My mother-in-law pretended to be passing on a message from me, telling Keith to enjoy the trip. So he thought he would enjoy the trip for my sake and departed without contacting me. But my mother-in-law knew Keith would call me eventually. She called me on Keith's phone just before departure. After they had riled me up, my sister-in-law pretended to accidentally break Keith's phone. Keith believed her and forgave her on the spot. But during the flight, he realized something was strange and called me as soon as he arrived at the hotel. You've got to be kidding me. Even my sister was in on it? What the hell are they doing? Keith, are you mad at what they did? Of course, I was looking forward to going on the trip with you, Kelly. It seemed Keith had nothing to do with it. If that was the case, I decided to get my husband's cooperation. I discussed the ongoing plan with Keith. So that's how things are moving, I said. I see. That sounds interesting, he responded. I've prepped everything. Keith, you just need to act like you're enjoying the trip. Understood. I have one favor to ask, though. Could you bring back some souvenirs for me and also some for my colleagues? This was my only concern. Whenever one goes on a trip, it's customary to bring back souvenirs for colleagues at my workplace. In fact, I had even been asked to buy some branded items. I could say I was left behind, but that would be too embarrassing. It was a dilemma for me, but with Keith on my side, it changed the situation. Now everything was settled. I provided the list of souvenirs to Keith and focused on what I needed to do. After sunrise, I had a demolition team come over. After getting a quote, they immediately began tearing down the house. The work finished quickly, and the plot of land was cleared in no time. A few days later, my in-laws returned home. They started causing the commotion in front of the empty plot of land. Then they called me and started complaining nonstop. That's the whole story. Did you understand? You've got to be kidding, I said. My mother-in-law yelled again. Even though she was on the other side of the phone, I wasn't scared at all. I calmly replied, "It's pointless to say anything now. I've already demolished the house." "What happened to our belongings? Did you throw them away?" "No, I didn't throw them away. I'm keeping them." "You are nothing but a thief." "I'm only keeping them. I'll return them if you pay." "Pay for what?" "For the trip and the moving costs. You did say you would at least pay for the trip, didn't you?" That? You should pay up soon." At that, my mother-in-law fell silent. It seemed she was at a loss for a reply. Then I heard my sister-in-law whispering in the background. Suddenly, my mother-in-law asked, "Before anything, I want to know if our belongings are safe. Where did you take them?" "They are in the warehouse my grandfather used to use. Anyway, I won't return them unless you pay. But your husband's retirement pension is coming, isn't it?" Yes, but, Then please pay me back. I'll return your belongings once you do." With that, I hung up. Still, my mother-in-law kept calling incessantly. Finally annoyed, I blocked all her calls. Feeling refreshed, my husband Keith arrived at the Weekly Mansion where I was staying. "I'm back, Kelly." "Welcome back. Did you bring any souvenirs?" "Of course I did." "Thank you. I had considered returning to my parents' home, but I didn't want to worry them. So I informed my parents that we would be living in a Weekly Mansion for a while as we rebuilt our house. Then I rented the Weekly Mansion and moved there. I had been staying in touch with Keith regularly and had informed him about the move, so after his return, he came directly to me. My in-laws must have found it strange that he was acting separately. I was nervous about getting found out, but I'm glad things worked out this way. By the way, Kelly, if you get money from Mom, do you plan to forgive her? If she promises not to interfere in our lives in the future, I plan to return her belongings and forgive her. I'm just wondering if she'll pay up without a fuss. Don't worry, the warehouse is locked and she can't take anything out without paying me back. There's no way to get into the locked warehouse. If they think it's possible, they'll give up and pay. I was confident, but I couldn't expect a reasonable response from my in-laws who lack common courtesy. I was reminded of this early the next morning when my phone rang in the dim morning hours. At this hour, I looked at my phone with sleepy eyes. It was another unknown number. When I answered, the person on the other side said, "I'm sorry for calling so early. I'm from the police." Police? I instantly woke up. I sat upright and listened carefully. There had been a disturbance at my grandfather's warehouse. It seems a local resident who uses the warehouse parking lot reported it. When we arrived, we found an intruder causing a ruckus in the warehouse and apprehended them. "I see, so you've caught the culprit." "But the intruder says they're a family member of the warehouse owner. They asked us to contact the owner." "Wait, my family, I had a bad feeling. When Keith and I rushed to the scene, several police cars were parked there, and in one of them were my in-laws." "Kelly, help us." My mother-in-law called out. My suspicions were confirmed. The intruders were my in-laws. "Are these individuals indeed your family?" a police officer asked. "They are technically my family," I replied. Keith and I apologized profusely to the police officer and the local people who had heard the commotion. After we apologized, we heard my in-laws' side of the story with the police officer present. They claimed they didn't have enough money to cover the moving and travel expenses I had asked for. Apparently, they had spent my father-in-law's retirement funds on traveling and repaying their own debts. That was challenging enough, but then my sister-in-law chimed in, "I've got a blind date tomorrow. Where are my clothes?" After some squabbles, they decided to take just what they needed from the warehouse. That's why the three of them broke into it. But once we got inside, we found photos of them partying with men mixed in with their belongings. This was a result of the investigation I had commissioned. When Keith and I asked a private detective to investigate my in-laws, it turned out that my mother-in-law and sister-in-law had been goofing around with men. These men worked in the nightlife industry, and my in-laws had poured quite a lot of money into them. They had even taken on debts, some of which they repaid using my father-in-law's retirement funds. On the other hand, my father-in-law was having an affair with a younger woman from his workplace. Despite the nice ring to his retirement, the truth was that he had been fired for his affair. I received these reports and photos just before my in-laws left for the trip. When they returned, I planned to use this as leverage to kick them out. But with things turning out this way, I had moved the photos to the warehouse along with my stuff. So they broke into the warehouse, found the photos, and started fighting over each other's misbehavior. "Seems like they brought this on themselves," I murmured. My mother-in-law shouted at me angrily, "What were you planning by taking these photos?" "Like I care," I retorted. My father-in-law yelled, "What have you done? This could ruin our family." "Well, that's your fault, isn't it?" "What? How dare you, as a daughter-in-law? Enough. If you have complaints, I'll sue you for trespassing." They'd all be arrested if it came to that. Realizing this, the three of them promptly quieted down. However, it was clear that none of them had the means to pay me back, so I proposed another option to them. "Would you rather work at a cannery to pay me back or get arrested for trespassing?" Predictably, they chose the former. I managed to get them jobs at a friend's cannery. They're working there every day now, earning the money they owe me. Meanwhile, I rebuilt a house on the land where my grandfather's house once stood. It's a brand new house that still retains traces of my grandfather's house. Keith and I are starting our married life anew in this convenient new home.